Passport to Advanced Math Lesson 13 is basically solving equations with variables in the denominator. In this standard, they basically break it down to variables in the denominator or square roots or radicals. But this lesson only deals with variables in the denominator. Now, a majority of the time, anytime you have a fraction equals a fraction, the best thing to do is basically just cross multiply. So when I look at like this first equation, right, I'm going to take this and look at that as being x squared minus 1 over x minus 1 equals negative 2 over 1. I can turn any whole number into a fraction by putting it over 1. Then all I'm going to do is cross multiply. 1 times x squared minus 1 equals, when I cross multiply this way, negative 2 times x minus 1, which is going to give me x squared minus 1 equals negative 2x plus 2. Now, you have to notice here that this one gives you a quadratic, so your first step is to set this equal to 0. I'm going to add 2x to both sides, subtract 2 from both sides, and I get x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Now, this is a no calculator problem, so you can't graph that and look for the solutions. So what we have to do here is look to see if it's factorable. Are there any numbers that multiply to give me negative 3 and add up to 2? Yes. That's going to factor to x plus 3 times x minus 1 equals 0. So right away, x plus 3 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0. And when I solve this, I get negative 3 and 1. Now here's the thing. It's very enticing to choose letter D, and you do see that we get two solutions here. But if I were to plug 1 back in, my denominator now becomes 0. Can I have a denominator that's equal to 0? No. So what this is called is an extraneous solution, which means we are not going to count it as part of our answer right now. So x equals negative 3, letter A is your answer. So the next equation, same thing. A fraction over a fraction equals a whole number, so I'm going to put that over 1. Then all I'm going to do is cross multiply. Doesn't matter which way you cross multiply first. So 10 times t minus 5 equals 1 times t plus 5. Now I'm going to distribute that 10. 10 times t is 10t. 10 times negative 5 is minus 50 equals 1t plus 5. So now I can solve this equation. This is much easier. Subtract 1t, add 50, I get 9t equals 55. And when I divide by 9, t is equal to 55 over 9, which is letter D. Again, with these guys, I'm telling you right now, these are all no calculator questions. And they don't make it easy to plug the answers back in, right? So even when they do, the next example shows you that it's not possible, because if I look at this, if 5 over x equals 15 over x plus 20, what is the value of x over 5? So in this problem, you have to solve for x first, then plug it back into x over 5 to find the value. Do not solve for x and stop and answer the question. Right? Go and look at the final answer. You have to plug x back in. So fraction equals a fraction. I'm going to cross multiply. 15 times x is 15x. 5 times x plus 20. 5 times x is 5x. 5 times 20 is 100. Now when I subtract 5x, I get 10x equals 100. And when I divide by 10, x equals 10. That's just half the problem. Now I have to plug that back in here. 10 divided by 5 is what? 2. Letter C. Do not forget that part. Read the entire question. Okay, the next one. Again, this is no calculator, right? And if it's no calculator, you have to be able to answer this properly. So when I look here, right, if 8 over x equals 160, what is the value of x? So I'm going to go ahead and do 8 divided by x equals 160 over 1. And when I cross multiply and solve this, 160x equals 8. Now what do I do to solve for x? I'm going to divide by 160. X gives me 8 over 160. Now, I could say that's equivalent to 1 over 20. And if you look at your final answers, right, they try to entice you to get 20. But that doesn't work. It's 1 over 20. Do not make that mistake. You know that answer can't make sense, or that. So 1 divided by 20, is that 0.05? And the answer to that is yes. Okay, now the next one is calculator. But they try to get you here. Now, there's an easy way to approach this, and there's a hard way to approach this. It says, in the equation above, which of the following is a possible value of x plus 1? So they want to know, what does x plus 1 equal? Now look here. I know I'm going to put this over 1, and I'm going to cross multiply. I'm going to do x plus 1 times x plus 1 equals 1 times 2 is 2. Now, I could go ahead and FOIL this out. But if you think about it, x plus 1 times x plus 1 is the same as x plus 1 all squared. And that equals 2. Now, again, I only have to solve for x plus 1. I could solve for x and plug it back in. That's going to be complicated. So what they want to trick you with is, how do I get x plus 1 all by itself here? If I take the square root of both sides, x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. So which of these could be a possible value? Doesn't x plus 1, what we're looking for here, equal the square root of 2, which is letter B. Now this last example is a tough one. All right. It says a group of friends decided to divide the $800 cost of a trip equally among themselves. When 2 of the friends decided not to go on the trip, those remaining still divided the $800 cost equally. But each friend's share of the cost increased by $20. How many friends were in the group originally? All right. So first off, right, the original cost, remember, would be 800 divided by the number of people. And what we're going to do is say n represents the number of people. So when I look at it, this 800 divided by n is the original cost. Then, when 2 of the friends decided not to go on the trip, those remaining still divided the $800 cost equally. But each friend's share went up $20. How many friends were in the group originally? So, right away here, when you look at it, the original cost, right, went up by $20. But if I wanted to algebraically figure out what the new cost would be, I could also take 800 and divide it by the number of people minus 2. Right? So this would be the new cost here. But the original plus, right, the $20 increase would also give you the new cost. So what we have to do is find the value of n that makes these 2 expressions equal. Now, to solve this, it's a little more difficult than just cross multiplying. Now, when I go to solve this, I think the easiest way to do this, right, is to basically multiply everything by what I call the canceler. All right. Now, this is a calculator question, so you could use a calculator, right? But if I multiply everything here, what would my common denominator be, right? It would be n and n minus 2. So what I'm going to do is multiply everything by n times n minus 2, n times n minus 2, n times n minus 2. Now, when I multiply this, the n's cancel, and really, this gives me 800 times n is 800n, 800 times negative 2 is minus 1600, plus 20n times n minus 2 is going to give me 20n squared minus 40n equals n minus 2 cancels and leaves me with 800n. Now if you look, now I get a quadratic, and I have to recognize that I get a quadratic here. And remember, any number I get is going to be positive. So the first thing I'm going to do is set this equal to 0. So I get 20n squared. I'm going to subtract 800n from both sides. Right away, those wipe out and leaves me with minus 40n minus 1600 equals 0. So from here, now I could learn to factor this, right, and solve it. I can use quadratic formula factoring methods such as I'm going to factor out the GCF of 20. That would give me n squared minus 2n minus 80 equals 0. Now, what numbers multiply to give me negative 80 and add up to negative 2? And that would be n minus 10 times n plus 2 equals 0. And if I go and solve this, I would get n minus 10 equals 0, n plus 2 equals 0. So n equals 10, n equals negative 2. So right here, there would originally was 10 people. But guys, once I get to this part here, do yourself a favor. Pull out the calculator, go to y equals, right, and plug in 20x squared minus 40x minus 1600. And right away when I hit graph, it's a pretty ugly graph, right? Now, I see right here, this is negative 8. That's not going to work, right? And I look, it crosses the x-axis right over here. So what I do is hit second graph to pull up the table, and I'll see 10 is the other x-intercept. So right there, I know the solution would be, oops, sorry, by the way, this would be 8, right? And there would be negative 8 and 10. Sorry about that. But right from the graph here, I'll notice that's my x-intercept, so it has to be 10 people. So I can cut that problem in half just by knowing that I can graph it and use the graph to solve that quadratic quicker.